We're learning the Sikha on Parsha Zachor and Chelek Chaf Aleph on page 190. Shir today is being learned L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. Of der Takana from Kriyas Parsha Zachor. Regarding this that Chazal instituted to read Parsha Zachor in the Shabbos before Purim, Leinin b'Teire dem Shabbos for Purim the Parsha from Zachor es asher asa lecha Amalek, fragt der Magen Avram. The Magen Avram asks the following question. We find various mitzvahs that consist of remembering certain things. There are the schiris that a person has to remember when you say the bracha of Kriya Shema in the end of the bracha of Avos Olam, and within Kriya Shema itself, there are things that you should be thinking about and remembering. Matan Torah, remember the Eibusha gave the Oster Torah. Maisa Amalek, what we're speaking about here, Parsha Zachor, the story with Amalek. Maisa Miriam, the story with Miriam when she spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu when she became then a Mitzeras. Shabbos, to remember Shabbos. And Maisa Egel, when Yidden made an Egel. This is what's known as the Sheish Schiris. There are 6 things that we have to always remember. If so, the question is, why did Chachamim institute specifically that out of all these, Parshas Amalek should be read from the Torah? We don't find this by other of the things that we are supposed to remember. The Magen Avram answers this question. As Matan Torah, yesh lanu chag atzeres. For Matan Torah, we have a Yom Tov. We have a Yom Tov dedicated, the Yom Tov of Shavuos. V'hu adin Shabbos. So too Shabbos. So there's the day of Shabbos that we remember Shabbos. We have Shabbos once a week, and therefore we have to remember it every day. But there's Shabbos, and therefore we don't have to specially establish the lane from the Torah. U'maisa Miriam, u'maisa Egel. Now the other two, remembering the story with Miriam and the story with the Egel, Loit tiknu, Chacham did not institute to read from the Torah this especially, Mipnei shehoya gnusan shel Yisrael, because this is something which is embarrassing for Yidden. Rabbi says, L'chayre is the sabanit ken teretz maspik. However, seemingly this is not a sufficient answer. Weil oich b'maisa Amalek, because similar regarding the story with Amalek is the Chfaran Purim. There's also a Yom Tov established which is Purim. Was ist verbunden mit Schiris und Mechias Amalek. The whole story of Purim is connected to Amalek, Haman being a descendant from Amalek, and the whole story is related to Amalek. Biz as the Kriya from Purim is, the Kriya Satayra on Purim itself is the Parsha from Milchemes Amalek, the story of the actual Milchama of Amalek, Vayave Amalek, and Parshas B'Shalach. Right, on Parshas Zachor, we read from Parshas Kiseitze, where the Torah says the mitzvah of Zachor. But on Purim, we read the story itself. Und nachmer, even more so, das was Parsha Zachor is der Shabbos. Far Purim, why was it established that we read Parsha Zachor in the Shabbos right before Purim? Is ki heichi de leitikta masiyah l'schire. As the lashon that it says in the Gemara, so that the fulfillment of the mitzvahs of Purim related to the victory of Yidden or the Ness of Yidden against Haman, which was a descendant of Amalek. So the fulfillment, the action of those mitzvahs should not be before we read and remember who Amalek is. So what this itself means, it's Mayim Chazal itself is showing you, as Purim is the Yasiyah. Purim is the action. It's not just reading from the Torah, but it's bringing it down even more concrete into the world of action. Fun der Schire, the Parsha Zachor, and it's the Asiyah of what? Of this remembrance of Parsha Zachor. So if so, definitely we have already a yontiv that takes care of remembering about Amalek in a very concrete manner. If so, why is it necessary to establish a separate takana of Kriyas Amalek to read and about remembering Amalek? Biz as the Shabbos wird angerufen Shabbos Parsha Zachor v'chayetze bezen. The minig is that we refer to the Shabbos as the Shabbos Parsha Zachor or Shabbos Zachor. So it must be something unique about Amalek that we dedicate the Kriyas HaTorah and the whole Shabbos to this theme. Is the fun mashma. So from this it's clear as the takana from Parsha Zachor, the takana to read Zachor is nit nor was is nitok in zman meyuchad. I've to der man and Maisa Amalek, not only like the Magen Avram says, because technically there is no other time established that we focus on remembering about the story of Amalek, nor weil es ist da a Yisrain ve'inyin miyuchad in schiris Maisa Amalek legabi the andere schiris, because there is a certain advantage and there's something unique about remembering Amalek more than other Zechiris. The Rebbe brings there in the Ha'ara, which the Rebbe will focus on later in the Sikha, that according to most Paiskim, remembering Amalek and the reading of the Parshas Zachor from the Torah is actually Minat Torah, which you don't find regarding the other Zechiris as well. So it must be something which is unique. So the question here is, was is der Inyan Miyuchad by Zechiras Maisa Amalek, was is nita by the andere Zechiris? What's so unique about remembering the story that Amalek had the battle with Amalek more than the other Zechiris? Was the far at men dafke for der Zechire kevege when a kriya mechedes, and therefore a special kriya satire was established for this. Ulachayre seemingly adarabba. On the contrary, the andere Zechires zenen in yonim kolaliim in der anhage von Ayiden b'chol eisa b'chol makim. They represent very general ideas that are relevant for the behavior of a Yid in every time and in every place. And the Rebbe goes through the other 5 Zechiris. Maimedar Sinai, Matan Torah. To remember Hashem giving us the Torah is doch the Yesod from ganz Torah mitzvahs. So obviously this is the foundation of all of Torah mitzvahs. Shabbos is from the mitzvahs kolalius. Shabbos is from the very general mitzvahs. It's the foundation of the entire Yiddishkeit. Was is Poyel, nit nur auf der Tag von Shabbos, it has its impact not only on the day of Shabbos when you rest, nor euch auf alle Sheises Yemei HaChol. It has an impact on every single day of the week. On the other hand, Maisa Malek, Maisa Egel, that is, the story with the Egel, which is the Heipach von Anoichi, V'lo Yilacha, the Yidden did something which went against the fact that the Eibishter is the only one. So this is something which is also very important, very central to the whole entire Yiddishkeit, the belief in Hashem. V'oid, another point why the Egel is so important. The Eibusha says, on the day that I'll remember that I'll punish you for anything else, so there'll be included a punishment for the Egel as well then. The Montes Ayiden, this reminds a Yid, that he always should be careful to stay away from an Aveda. So that it shouldn't come to it that the Yidden are punished, and then the Eibusha will remember and they'll be punished for the Egel as well. Was is doch kailol, this idea that a Yidden could be punished and the Egel is always something that comes back to be punished as well, that's not only regarding Sur Mirah, but it also includes to be careful in doing all the mitzvahs as the obligation is. So it comes out that the Egel is very fundamental as far as the fact that it's the emunah of a Yid, and also it's relevant to every single mitzvah, both in Sur Mirah and Asay Teif. And then the story with Miriam, which is seemingly a individual story with Miriam that spoke out about Moshe Rabbeinu, which did not have any outcome for the entire Klal Yisrael for all future generations. But nevertheless, here there's a lesson for all Yidden, and a very important lesson. To what degree a Yid should be careful to not speak Lashon Hara. Was is from the Averis Hachi Chamuris. Lashon Hara is one of the most severe Averis. V'chazal Zagin, as it says in the Gemara, as it says Magdal Avenis Keneged Gimel Averis Avedizara V'Gili Arayis Ashvichas Domim. That this Aveda of speaking Lashon Hara is as bad and is equivalent to the 3 worst Averis of Avedizara, Gili Arayis and Ashvichas Domim. Und zusammen damit, and at the same time, even though it's such a severe Aveda, von die schwerste oiskid werden legamri finir. As the Gemara says, it's one of the Avedas that it's very, very difficult for a person to be careful with. And therefore, we understand why speaking and remembering the story with Miriam, which was basically a story of Lashon Hara, is something to remember every day. But remembering the story that happened with Amalek when Yidden were on the way to Matan Torah, that seems to be a certain incident that happened and that brings a specific mitzvah. And seemingly it does not have in it kein limud for Yidden ban hagasai, any lesson for a Yid in his behavior, unachalimut klali. And to say that it's dafke, this mitzvah that has a very important and central lesson that we establish a special Shabbos and a Kriyas HaTorah to read, unlike all the other Schiris, it doesn't seem to be the case. So this is the general question here on the inyan of Schiris Ma'is Amalek. The Tmiya in them is noch starker. The Rebbe continues, the question regarding this becomes even stronger when we think about how or what is the relevance of the Schiris Ma'is Amalek bisman hazeh today. The tachlis from Schiris Amalek is, what's the purpose of this mitzvah? To remember what Amalek did. Is mechias Amalek. The purpose is to wipe out Amalek or any of the descendants of the entire nation of Amalek. As the pasuk, the psukim continue after, it says Zachor. When the Eibusher will give you the ability and you won't have any other enemies around you, so then you have the mitzvah of Timches Amalek, Zachor Amalek, to erase any remnants of Amalek. That's the purpose of remembering. It's just to remember in order to come to erase Amalek, to fight and erase Amalek. On the Rambam is das mas, but the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvahs explains this clearly. Tzivanu liskay ma'ashasalanu Amalek. There's the mitzvah to remember what Amalek did to us. V'lisna yaisai, and that brings the feeling to hate Amalek. V'choleis in all times, choleis ve'eis. V'na'oired anafashis b'maimarim lihilacham bay, and to awaken our souls with learning the inyanim that it says in the Torah, the statements that are written in the Torah about Amalek, and we will be able to fight against Amalek. So the whole point is the lihilacham bay. Now, if so, the question is, Bisman Hazeh, this has very little relevance, or seemingly no relevance at all. Bisman Hazeh is nit shayach to mekayim zayin dem tzibur from mechias Amalek b'poil. It's impossible to fulfill the mitzvah of erasing and wiping out Amalek. Weil, Aleph, number 1, mitzvahs mechias Amalek is nor ve'yidin zayin alad masam. The mitzvah only applies when Yidden are all in Eretz Yisrael, in a matzah von menucha, and are living there peacefully and tranquilly, as the pasuk says, that no other nations and no other others are harming or bothering Yidden, so then they have the mitzvah to wipe out Amalek. So that means that's not relevant today. And Beis afile then sovold gewendet neumanal, even if that would have been the fact that Yidden are in Eretz Yisrael and they're living there peacefully, is nit meglech to durchführen mechias Amalek. It's just impossible to wipe out Amalek today. Weil, as the Gemara tells us, kvar ola Sancherev ubilbil esailam. Sancherev came and confused things. He mixed all nations. He displaced people from one place to another. And v'chol de parish miru beparish. Anyone that comes from the people in the world, he's coming from the majority, and the majority is not Amalek. So since we don't know who is who, so we have to follow the majority, so we don't know anyone, we don't identify any guy as an Amalek, we just identify him as the Raiv, as the majority, which is not Amalek. So kuntais, so it comes out as that inyan from Schiras Amalek, bisman hazeh, that this inyan, this mitzvah, to remember what Amalek did today, is not so relevant in actuality, because the purpose of remembering is to awaken the hatred in you to want to come and fight and wipe out Amalek. That doesn't apply today. And nevertheless, specifically regarding this remembrance, which is less relevant than any of the others, there's a special kriya to read it, and a special Shabbos dedicated to the theme of wiping out Amalek. Why is that? So the Rebbe will bring us to a new understanding of what the mitzvah of Schiras Amalek is, and will prove it from the way the mitzvah of Schiras Amalek is al pi nigla, and then explain al pi chsidis what the idea of Schiras Amalek is, and therefore it is actually a very fundamental and central inyan that we dedicate a kriya and a special Shabbos for this. So wir haben das verstehen, behaktem abir in dem etzem inyan von mitzvah Schiras Amalek. Let's understand better the very mitzvah, the very definition of this mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Because now seemingly there are two obvious questions here. Aleph, number 1, as the tachlis von Schiras Amalek is mechias Amalek. Kanal. Since the whole purpose of remembering Amalek is all in order to erase, wipe out Amalek, as quoted before from the Rambam. So for was is da the chiyuv of Schiras Amalek oich bezman when al pi teire is nit shayach mechias Amalek bepoil. So then why is there any mitzvah of Schiras Amalek today? If al pi teire it's impossible to fulfill the mitzvah of mechias Amalek because the conditions don't allow al pi teire, so there should be no mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek either. If these two mitzvahs are linked to each other, so then Schiras Amalek should not be a mitzvah today. But it is though. So why is it a mitzvah without mechias Amalek if these two mitzvahs are linked to each other? Beis, favos davon bechlal onkommen zu abazunde tzivoi Zachor asalacha Amalek. A deeper and more fundamental question is, why, if it's true that the entire idea of the mitzvah of Schira is just to arouse ourselves, to inspire ourselves, to hate Amalek, to come and fight with him. Why is it necessary to have this separate mitzvah, to remember who Amalek is, to fight against Amalek? Und es ist nicht genug der Zivui von Timche Zecher Amalek allein. And it's not enough that Eibishter commands us to go ahead and wipe out Amalek. Eibishter gives us a mitzvah. So, if you want to be inspired to fulfill the mitzvah, learn about the mitzvah itself, and you'll get inspired like every other mitzvah that Eibishter gives, that if you don't feel inspired to do it, so you have to inspire yourself and learn about the content of the mitzvah to get inspired. Why is it necessary to have a new and separate mitzvah of the Taryag mitzvahs, which is basically all about inspiring yourself to fulfill another mitzvah, to fulfill the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek? Al derech, the Rebbe brings an example, Videt Tzivui lo yisachaya kol neshama. Another mitzvah is, or another lav is, not to allow any of the B'shaychas Dizay Numas, the 7 nations that were living in Eretz Yisrael. When Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, you may not allow them to live. We don't find that there's a separate mitzvah to awaken ourselves and remember their bad actions. That this will inspire ourselves to come and fight against them. There's the mitzvah, and the mitzvah itself is the best inspiration. It's that you know that you have to inspire yourself to do the mitzvah. So the fact over here, there's this new separate mitzvah, is the fun gufe gedrungen. It's from this itself. It's clear, and this proves as afalpi, as the tachlis from schiras Amalek is mechias Amalek. Yes, it is true that the purpose of remembering about Amalek is in order to come to then wipe out Amalek, is a beda an inyan was tut sich auf in schiras Amalek for sich. There is something that is accomplished just by this, that you remember Amalek for itself, even before and you come to actually utilize this inspiration to come and wipe out Amalek. Remembering who Amalek is in itself does accomplish something as well. Was the far, and therefore rechent der Rambam. Weil derech ze andere meinea mitzvahs, so the Rambam and others that count mitzvahs, and there's various discussions what is included as a separate of the mitzvah of the Taryag mitzvahs. So the Rambam counts mechias Amalek, wiping out Amalek, und schiras Amalek, remembering Amalek, als zwei besondere mitzvahs. Mit besondere gedarim, they're separate mitzvahs, and they are defined differently. They apply differently. L'dugme. So as far as the definition of the mitzvah, where do we see the difference between these two mitzvahs? Mechias Amalek is from the mitzvahs v'zen chayva al tzibur. That's from those mitzvahs that are not considered to be a mitzvah of the individual. It's a mitzvah for the congregation. It is chal. It takes effect on everybody as one whole. Unlike Kamedeis, according to some opinions, is this a mitzvah from melech fundem tzibur. It's a mitzvah that's actually, it's the melech, it's the king's mitzvah to do this, the melech being the king of all, the king of the tzibur. So the Rebbe says it's also a certain kind of mitzvah that belongs not to the individual, but to the representative of the entire tzibur, being the king. Und die mitzvah hat kamet noim. And additionally, besides this very general definition that it's a mitzvah that lies upon everybody as a whole, but as we mentioned already before, that the fulfillment of this mitzvah has various conditions. Dafke, la'achre knisas bnei Yisrael la'aretz, it only applies after you enter into Eretz Yisrael, v'oid, and more conditions. Masha'en kein schiras Amalek, which is not the case with the mitzvah of just remembering who Amalek is and what he did, is a mitzvah if yedin yochid bazunde. So first of all, this is a mitzvah that lies upon every individual. On is a mitzvah timidis. This is a constant mitzvah. Before Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, after b'chol makom b'chol zman, and every time or in any place. And according to some, it's actually a mitzvah every day. Und der inyan was wird aufgetan durch schiras Amalek for sich. So this accomplishment of remembering Amalek, so before you even come to fulfill, to wipe out Amalek, so it in itself accomplishes something, is an inyan klali ganz Torah. This is a very central theme and a great accomplishment that's relevant for the entire Torah. Noch mehr wie the andere schiras anal. Even more than the other schiras. So here, this last point, this is the point of the answer to the question that the Rebbe asked in the beginning of the Sikha: why are we dedicating a special Shabbos and a special Kriyas HaTorah for Amalek? Just like we see from the very fact that the schiras Amalek is counted as a mitzvah for itself, so we understand that it's not just a mitzvah that's tied and linked to being an inspiration to actually wipe out Amalek, but schiras Amalek accomplishes something in itself. We can understand now and take that to the next step and say that what it accomplishes for itself is inyan klali, is very central to the entire Torah. as will be explained later in Se'iv Zayin. So to understand what remembering Amalek accomplishes in itself, besides the fact that the purpose of the mitzvah taka is to wipe out Amalek, but it's counted as a separate mitzvah because the remembering itself is already an accomplishment. So we need to understand what's b'chlal, this whole entire idea of wiping out Amalek. Who is this Amalek and why is he so terrible that we have to wipe out Amalek? That inyan for Amalek is the theme about when we speak about remembering to wipe out Amalek. What does he represent? Is Yedeyas Ribainai? He's one that knows his master, he knows Hashem, u'miskaven limited by. And he purposefully, intentionally rebels against Hashem. So therefore, before a Yid could come to wipe out Amalek from Amalek, literally the descendants of Amalek, and he first has to be sure, as by and in im alain, that at and in his own personal self, zol zayin Amalek. There should be no Amalek at all. Yideyas Rabbeinu miskaven limrud by. There should be no remnants of such a kind of a hanhaga, such kind of behavior where he knows Hashem, but he still is rebelling against Hashem. Afilin bedakos, not even in the most subtle degree, kidlakaman sivav, as will be explained later in Sivav. How is it possible that by a Yid there should be an Amalek by him himself? In other words, the point of the mitzvah of Amalek is not just about eradicating a certain nation from the world, but it's about eradicating what Amalek represents. There's a reason why this mitzvah of mechiyah, to wipe out a nation, applies specifically to Amalek, because they represent this miskaven limrud by. So the only way you can fulfill that mitzvah properly is if there's no miskaven limrud by in you, and the person himself. Das is the teichen from mitzvah schiris Amalek. So this is the idea of the mitzvah of remembering Amalek, besides that it leads to wiping out Amalek literally, but then there's an accomplishment in the zechira itself. It's not only to remember, in order to inspire oneself, to come afterwards to do something else, which is milchemes or mechias Amalek kipshute, to fight and wipe out Amalek literally. Oder as durch dem Zachorin soll man sich eisiten von einem Inyan bilti ratzoi, or that remembering about Amalek, even if you want to apply that to the person himself, that the point would be that now this will prevent you of some other negative behavior. So then again, it's still, the remembrance is all about a preventive for something else outside this memory itself. Al derech schiris ma'aseh Miriam, similar to the way it is with remembering the story about Miriam, zu verhitten for lashon hara. You remember what happened to Miriam, this will prevent you of speaking lashon hara. Not rather, zechiras Amalek gufa, remembering who and what Amalek is, tut oif mechias Amalek shebalev. This itself accomplishes the erasing of Amalek within his heart, in im gufa, in the person himself, just by remembering how terrible and how low and how despicable and how great of a rebellion Amalek is, and remembering that Amalek is the Amalek in the person's own heart that he's remembering about, that itself exposes Amalek and wipes him out in the heart of the person. It's possible that by a Yid there's an Amalek within his own life. That wants to affect him, that he should rebel against, God forbid, Hashem. Und wenn der Zachor Amalek is by im kideboy, when a person remembers what Amalek represents, and the Rebbe adds kideboy, the way it's supposed to be, to properly remember Amalek with the real full hatred, to know who Amalek is, and to really feel how bad Amalek is, so this accomplishes, this itself is how you erase that Amalek within your soul. Es wird ausgewurzelt. This itself uproots and ausgemerkt and erases jede netie von jedei chol miskaven limrud by. Any leaning in this direction of rebellion against Hashem. When you expose how low something is and how despicable something is, that is the best way to get rid of it, by uprooting it completely. If you think about other kinds of things of how great the Eibishter is, or other kinds of his bainanos, so then you didn't actually uproot Amalek from its source. But when you realize what Amalek is and how much you don't want that Amalek in your heart, so then that uproots the Amalek from its source, from its roots. With this we understand, was dafke die Zechira, hat man verbunden mit der Kriye Muyachades B'Teire. This explains why it's specifically this Zechira to remember Amalek. So it was instituted that you should learn this specifically from the Teire. Val Teire is balabas of Mitzias Ha'olam, and that is because Teire is the master or the ruler, the boss of everything that happens in the Mitzias of the world, in the existence of the world. The power of Teire on everything in the world is extremely powerful, as the Rebbe here brings a Yerushalmi that the Rebbe quotes many times. Al derech divrei Chazal hayeduim ala posek lakel gomer alai. So the Yerushalmi there says that when there's a psak din of Teire, the psak din of Teire itself, or of a bezdin, changes the very existence in the world. Yerushalmi there is talking about a girl that has a birthday, and let's say on the first day of the month, and she would become 3 years old. When she's 3 years old, she becomes a basula, and then the bezdin decided to be ma'aber, to add a 30th day to the previous month, and now instead of it being aleph, it ends up being a lamid. So what happens? Her body changes. Bisuleh chayzren. The psak of the bezdin that today is lamed and it's not aleph, and she's not 3 years old. It changes the very nature in her body. That's the power of the words of Teire, of a psak of Teire. Und the far, so therefore, durch dem was man verbindet Chiles Amalek mit Kriyas HaTeire, when you connect remembering Amalek, not just that a person individually in his mind and his heart remembers Amalek, but he's hearing it from it being read from the Teire, vertes as zikaron was tut oif mechias Amalek shebenafshe. So then the very zikaron itself is what erases Amalek within his soul, within his heart. Not that it prevents something from the future, but this Zechira itself brings about the very erasing of Amalek. So this explains why the inyan of Zechira of Amalek is an inyan b'fnei atzma. It's a separate thing, and the point is to erase the source of the Amalek, which could be in the heart of the Yid. Now the Rebbe explains, according to this, as I mentioned earlier, that according to most Paiskim, the mitzvah of remembering Amalek and reading from the Torah, Parsha Zachor, is a mitzvah min ha-Torah, unlike any of the other schiras. Das ist euch eine von den Biurim, was kriyas Parsha Zachor is ladas, Reva Paiskim, a mitzvah sasei min ha-Torah. This is one of the explanations why it's only Parsha Zachor that, according to most of Paiskim, it's a mitzvah min ha-Torah. Now, what's the difference between a mitzvah min ha-Torah and mitzvah midrabanan? So, from the iluyim in mitzvahs deiraisa, legabe mitzvahs derabbanan, one of the greater things, one of the advantages that there are to a mitzvah which is min ha-Torah, in contrast to mitzvahs which only the Chachamim instituted, is was mitzvahs deiraisa haben a starkere peule auf und in Welt. It has a greater impact. The mitzvahs min ha-Torah have a greater impact on and in the existence of the world itself. In other words, as far as the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah is concerned, they are both obligations. And the Rebbe will soon say there's actually an advantage to the mitzvahs midrabanan. But as far as the impact that the fulfillment of the mitzvah has on the entity, on the cheftza, on the object used in the mitzvah in the world, a mitzvah min ha-Torah has a much greater impact. V'bavos the arichas and achreinim, it's well known, a lengthy discussion that achreinim speak about, that make the distinction as surei deiraisa, those things that are forbidden min ha-Torah, biblically forbidden, zenena isa cheftza. The iser is actually on the very object itself, which is forbidden, and therefore you may not eat it or may not have any benefit of it. The zach vert adovim mesuv chulu. The very item itself becomes something which is despicable, and therefore that's the reason why you may not eat it. Which is not the case when it comes to something which is only awesome Rabbanon, Zenolet Kamedei is blois and Issa Gavra. According to some opinions, is only something which is a prohibition that lies upon the person. Yes, the item is not despicable, it's a permissible item, but nevertheless, you may not have contact with it. You may not eat it, or you may not have any benefit of it. The Chachamim legen aroif an Isser of the mention. The Chachamim are placing upon the person this Isser, aber nit of the Cheftze ha'olam atzmam. But they are not placing the Isser on the very object itself, that it becomes a dova mesuv, that it becomes a despicable object. The Rebbe spoke about this inyan ba'arichas gedola, as it's here in the Maramakim in Ahara 48, in the Fabrengens of Tafshin Lamed Vav by Achon Shal Pesach. There the Rebbe brought famous lashon that Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that even a issa medivrei seifrim is gimel klippus atmeis, meaning that a issa midrabanan is a davar mesuv, that the object itself is aser. But the Rebbe there explained that what that means is only after the person eats it and he does an isser with this object, then it becomes gimel klippus atmeis. But before, the etzem issa midrabanan itself, even according to the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, we can still say is only a isser gavre. It's a isser that the person may not have contact with it, but not that the object itself is gimel klippus atmeis. Now, on the other hand, we know that there's great advantages to a mitzvah midrabanan. Those was mitzvahs midrabanan haben am my life mitzvahs deiraisa. This that we find that a mitzvah midrabanan has an advantage over a mitzvah minatayre. K'mayim Chazal, as Chazal tell us, harevim alay divrei seifrim yeisim divrei teire. It's sweeter for me, more the words of the Chachamim, even more than the words of the Torah. What's the reason for this? If we're saying that the mitzvahs min Torah are much more powerful and have a much greater impact in the world, so why are we saying that the mitzvahs min Rabbanan are sweeter? Is this be'ikir negeyat dem gavra? This, that it's sweeter, is regarding the person fulfilling the mitzvah. And the reason is, v'alenim kiyam mitzvahs shaysifu Rabbanan, because fulfilling these mitzvahs that Chachamim added, direkt zechayis di arevus u'tshukit zayin eved Hashem. This expresses the sweetness and the yearning of a Yid to be a servant of Hashem. Was the far better lechatchila gzeir aleinu gzeiris, and therefore, as the Medrash says, Yidden beg Hashem and say to Hashem, decree upon us decrees. We want to have the mitzvahs. Und danach, and even after Hashem gives us the mitzvahs, bagnugent sich nicht damit. He's still not satisfied with what the Eibishter gave. Und is noch meisef alein gzeiris. Yidden add more precautions and more mitzvahs mit Rabbanan. There are certain mitzvahs that are actually not precautions. There are the 7 mitzvahs midrabanan the Chachamim added, or we also make other fences and precautions in order to be able to fulfill the gzeiris, the mitzvahs minatayre, kedei noch mer fazicheren kiyem gzeiris, to even be more assured that we will be careful to fulfill the Eibishter's decrees. So all mitzvahs midrabanan represent this special enthusiasm of Yidden to accept and to do and fulfill properly the mitzvahs minatayre. So in that sense, dafke mitzvahs midrabanan express Yidden's enthusiasm and sweetness of the fulfillment of a mitzvah. Va'oidya shleima, we can say another point in what the advantage of mitzvahs midrabanan are and why they're considered to be sweeter. By mitzvahs deiraisa, when it comes to a mitzvah minatayre, wie bald zei peilen welt a verstarkeren öfen. At this point that we just said before, that mitzvahs minatayre are extremely powerful. They have a godly power to impact the very existence of the world. Is by zei nita zei kentik as mizmekayim the mitzvahs blois mitzad tzivei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when you do these mitzvahs, it's not so noticeable the fact that the person is only doing this mitzvah simply because he's here to fulfill Hashem's command, without thinking what this mitzvah will accomplish and what he will gain out of this mitzvah. Vazgulas ha-mitzvah, because when a Yid does a mitzvah minatayre, the sgul of the mitzvah, in other words, what the mitzvah accomplishes, was it tutoiv ba'olam, that has a great impact of the world, is mailim oifen kabbalah soil shebekiyam a mitzvah. This conceals on the pure acceptance of the yoke of heaven to fulfill the mitzvah, was he is tzivei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, doing it just for the fact that it's the Eibishter's mitzvah. You do the mitzvah, and involved in it, or at least it seems outwardly, that the mitzvah has a great impact. So it's not noticeable that it's being done just for the sake of Hashem. Hashenken and kiyam mitzvahs derabbanan, which is not so when it comes to do the mitzvahs midrabbanan. With this gulas mitzvah is nit as stark. What the mitzvah accomplishes is not as powerful. So here, the fulfillment of mitzvahs midrabbanan, what this expresses is that through this mitzvah he accomplishes great things in the world, nor as an eved Hashem, he does the mitzvah simply because he's Hashem's servant, was folk dem rotzen v'tzivya melech, and therefore he listens and does what the desire and the command of the king is. So that's the sweetness and the specialty that's expressed in the fulfillment of mitzvahs midrabbanan. But this is all regarding the gavra, regarding what a person is expressing when he fulfills the mitzvah. However, regarding the very object, the existence of the world itself, was mitzvahs darfen oifton in Welt, this, that mitzvahs must accomplish something within the world itself, is adarabba. So over here, on the contrary, mitzvahs deiraisa haben dem koyach haTorah. The mitzvahs that are min haTorah, they have a special power of the Torah itself zu bewirken die Hefze Metzias von Welt, that is able to impact and change the existence of the world itself, and an Eufen was es nicht da by mitzvahs derabbanan kanal, to such an extent that we don't find by the mitzvahs midrabanan. Okay, so therefore, this is the special, unique power of mitzvahs min Torah, that it changes the very mitzias, the very entity, or in the lashon of the sikh here, the cheftze of the world itself. On the far. So now this explains regarding Parshas Zachor why this is the only one of the sheish schiris that's a mitzvah min Torah. On the far is kriyas Parshas Zachor a mitzvah min Torah. This is a mitzvah min Torah to read. Was does git a koyach noisef? This gives additional power. As the schiris Amalek zol oifton the mechias Amalek, that the very remembrance of Amalek, when you hear and read the Amalek from the Torah and you're fulfilling a mitzvah min Torah, this itself accomplishes it. This is the power to actually erase Amalek, because it's a mitzvah min Torah that will have an impact on the Amalek. Benidin didon sheba adam, and here we're talking about the Amalek, which is in the heart of the person. So the cheftze that the Torah, the mitzvah min Torah is affecting, is the person. The Amalek in the heart of the person is that cheftze that the kriyas Torah will affect. Okay, so this is the explanation of why this is different than all other mitzvahs of the schiris, and it's a mitzvah min Torah. Here, the Rebbe will come back to explain what is this idea of Amalek being in the heart of a Yid. That it's possible for there to be in the heart of a Yid, a Yideya es riboinai u'miskaven limrid by. What does that mean? Is that possible really in the heart of a Yid, such a kind of a thing, that he's intentionally or deliberately rebelling against Hashem? So the Rebbe explains, Vibalt aschiris Amalek is a mitzvah tmidis. Since remembering Amalek is a concept mitzvah, ist verstandig, als das ist ein Inyan, was jeder darf sich in den bewahren tomid b'chol azmanim. So this is something that everybody, regardless of what level you're on, you always have to be careful with this in all times, and constantly. And what's the reason for this? Warum? Because most definitely there's no room to say God forbid. As a Yid darf sich tomid bavaranin von nit sein a Yideya es Rabbeinu u'miskaven limrid bei. Definitely you can't say that every single Yid has to constantly be careful of not being one that knows Hashem and is deliberately rebelling against Hashem. The Rebbe is Metzayin Ar 56 to the Rambam that says, what's the kavan of Yid, what's the miskaven of a Yid? To do the ratzon of Hashem. Even if a Yid, God forbid, doesn't have it, it's because Yitzrei onsei, because the Yetzer Hara overcame him. But to say that a Yid, his kavana, his pnimius is to be mighted in the Eibishter, how can you say that this exists in the heart of a Yid? So where is there an Amalek in the heart of a Yid? Dafür aber ständig sein bewahrend in dem Inyan von Amalek bedakas. But nevertheless, a Yid does have to constantly be careful with the existence of Amalek in his heart in a subtle degree. Und befragt, as von dem kann sof herauskommen an Inyan von Yidei cholu miskaven limrid bei Rachman al-Itzlan. And especially that if you don't tend to that subtle Amalek that may be in your heart, so then it is possible that it should come out to a situation where the Yid is Yideya, he knows Hashem, but he rebels and he's deliberately rebelling against Hashem. So what is this subtle Amalek that we're talking about? Rabbi, or the explanation is, so the end of the story of the Amalek in Parshas B'Shalach, it says that Hashem places his hand on his throne, and it uses the term case, ka, the throne of Hashem. So it says Hashem's name with the only Yud-Kei. And Hashem fights Amalek. Zogen Chazal, so it says in the Medrash, as ein shmoi shalem, ad sheyimche shmoi shel Amalek. That the Eibish's name is incomplete until he will completely eradicate the name of Amalek. That's why it says only the name of Yud-Kei. Kol zman Amalek is Kayim, is the Shem nit b'shleimus. As long as Amalek is alive, Hashem's name is incomplete. It says blois Yud-Kei. You just have the two letters of Hashem's name, Yud-Kei. That's why it says only Yud-Kei here. Amalek is menaged of the Oisi is Vavkei from Shem Havaya, which means that the Vavkei is what's missing because Amalek's opposition and rebellion is against those last two letters of Hashem's name. That's what comes out according to this Medrash, which is also quoted by Rashi there in Parshas B'Shalach. Now this seems to be very difficult to understand. Yibalt, as Amalek is miskaven, limrid boy. We just said, what's Amalek? Amalek knows Hashem and he's deliberately rebelling against him, against Hashem himself, in Eibishtin. So if so, is my time, so then what's the reason that Aleph, was that is menaged blois of shleimus Hashem, that here from this Medrash and Rashi it comes out that Amalek is only an opposition to the completion of Hashem's name. Onit of Hashem b'chlalusai. But he's not an opposition to the name of Hashem in its entirety, only the last two letters. Beis, in them nigud of Shleimus Hashem, the fact that Amalek is in opposition to the completion of Hashem's name is nitav Yudkei Sheb'Shem. Not on the beginning, on the Yudkei of Hashem's name. Was is kaidim un hechef un vavkei, which is before and therefore higher than the level of vavkei. The higher level of Hashem, that they're not in opposition to. They're in opposition to the lower two letters of Hashem's name. And Gimel Adarabah, on the contrary, since they're only in opposition to vavkei, as bleibt Yudkei, so if you leave, Yudkei is there and it's written in the pasuk Yudkei, bleibt a ganze Shem von design Shem Shem in Mchakim. So you still have a full, complete name of Hashem, one of the 7 names of Hashem that may not be erased. So it comes out that Amalek's opposition is not that strong after all. What does this mean? But on the other hand, we're saying that what does Amalek represent? Miskaven limrid bay. So the explanation here is, and here we come to a deeper understanding of what the opposition of Amalek is. The Pa'ulais von die Dal Daisies von Shem Havaya. What are the actions corresponding to the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Oifan Yidden? Again, the Pa'ulais von die Dal Daisies von Shem Havaya Oifan Yidden. The impact, that is, of the 4 letters of Hashem's name on a Yid, on the neshama of a Yid. Und wie sie stehen und zennen benefesh Adam. And as they are represented and expressed within the makeup of the soul of a Yid. The soul of a Yid, like Hashem himself is expressed in 4 letters, which represent 4 different levels. So too the makeup of the neshama of a Yid is also represented, or is also expressed in these 4 different things. Adam al-Elyon, because a Yid is similar to Hashem himself, Bitz al-Meinu, created in Hashem's image. So Zenin, they are as follows, as Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. Yud Kei is Chochmah and Bina. The Yud, which is 1 point, is like the Chochmah, which is the beginning of the understanding, that first point. And Bina is the Heid, broader letter, which is to broaden a person's understanding into the details. That's all still in the world of Seichel, in the person's intellect. The intellect of the Neshama. Vav, the letter Vav, which is drawn down, or it's Gematria 6, which are Midas Shebelev, the 6 Midas in a person's heart, and V'Teira. And also Teira comes down into this world, and the main mitzvah of Teira is B'Dibur, and therefore it's represented in the Vav that comes down. And then the last Hey of Hashem's name, Dibur Umaisa. That refers in mitzvahs, the speech and action that a person speaks and does in the actions of mitzvahs. That's what the Yudke Vavke represents in the expression of the neshama of a Yid. So now based on this, we'll understand what the main Mulchama of Amalek is. Iker Mulchemes Amalek is the minion from Poyal Mamish. The main battle of Amalek is fighting a Yid serving the Eibishter in actuality, in Poyal Mamish, in the world of action. Auf Meichen Allein, just on the person's intellect, that the fact that his neshama understands the greatness of Hashem and connects to Hashem through his intellect, which is Bechinas Yudkei, the Yudkei of the neshama is a nitmet azay menagid. Here, he's not opposed to this to such a great extent. Im artnit azay stark der Yideyes Ribainai. Him, Amalek, he's not bothered, perturbed so much by this, that a Yid will know and learn and understand Hashem. As mahat nor a verstanden elokos, that a person will be just happy and will keep it just by the world of intellect to understand Hashem. Will aber, what Amalek desires is, as does on the poil sign of midish belev, that understanding you have in your mind. So keep it in the place of mind, in your mind. Keep it cold. Remain indifferent to what you understand in your mind. And it should not have an impact on your feelings, and to be connected in your heart. Was brengen zu machshava dibra maisa, and the main point here is the midis. When a person starts feeling, so then he becomes connected, and it will impact his real behavior. Machshava dibra maisa is thought, speech, and action, which is represented in bechinas vavke, the level of vavke. So that's where the main opposition of Amalek is. Not to allow what you know in your mind to come down and to have an impact on your behavior. Now understanding that this is what Amalek is, so now the contrary, now we can understand Demos is the merida ayuma b'yaiser. If this is the case, that a person really does have the proper understanding of Yudke, his connection to Hashem and his mayach, but in his heart he remains cold and indifferent, this really is a tremendous and a terrible rebellion against Hashem. He knows the truth, but yet there's that disconnect that he doesn't allow it. It's not going to touch me. I'm not going to change my behavior even though I know the truth. Und das ist mudgish in Lashon Chazal. So this is emphasized. And what Chazal say, Yoideya es Ribono. Yes, he knows his master. Er hat eine Idee in Ribayna. He has a real understanding of who Hashem is. Und von deswegen, and nevertheless, miskaven limrit by, he's considered to be one that's deliberately rebelling against Hashem, weil die Idee hat nicht kein Wirkung auf Midas und Machshava Dibra Maisa, since that understanding does not have any impact on the person himself, on his feelings or on his behavior of Machshava Dibra Maisa. So, miskaven limrit by does not mean in the literal sense, begassos, the way it would be understood that he deliberately rebels against Hashem. But the very fact that he knows and understands the truth, and he doesn't take time to bring it down and to allow it to affect him, that itself is equivalent to a merida, because, and the Rebbe says, merida yuma b'yaisa, that after knowing all that truth and not allowing it to impact him in his heart and in his behavior, so it's like miskaven limrid by. That is the Mechama of Amalek. Und in den Prat von Amalek, now in this detail of what Amalek's war against Hashem is, as an Yedeya as Ribayne, that this that he knows Hashem, bringt nit Kabbalas el Ribayne, does not lead to accepting upon himself the yoke of his master of Hashem, al kolpanim, and here the Rebbe adds, al kolpanim loit der Yediyah, that it should be matching up, it should be equivalent to the level of knowledge that he has. Was Kabbalas oil is machriach Torah mitzvahs. Kabbalas oil is what brings a person or forces a person, so to speak, to fulfill the Torah mitzvahs. Und as es felt by Kabbalas oil ribaynai is es bedakus mirida biribaynai. Lacking in Kabbalas oil, accepting Hashem as your God, and therefore the one that tells you what to do and you follow his orders. So that's by definition, at least bedakas, subtly, a rebellion against Hashem. So again, here the Rebbe added that the point here is that it's possible that the Yidei Ribaynai does impact his behavior, but not according to the level that he knows. According to what he has learned and the level of godliness that he understands would demand a much greater level of dedication and Kabbalah Sale. So if it doesn't bring out a level of Kabbalah Sale that's equivalent to the level of knowledge, that there's still bedakas and Amalek here. So this level of Amalek that we're speaking about here, this is something that everybody has to be careful about. Because on any level, on every level of a person serving and knowing Hashem, can zayin an art faratos and dominion. There could be room for mistake in this subject. The degree and the extent of the Kabbalah Sale. There are many different levels of Kabbalah Sale. Person dedicating himself to Hashem. So it could be to an extent where a person has certain cheshbainis, where it's not so pure, not so complete, not a full dedication. And the levels of dedication is explained in Chassidus, Eved Neman, Eved Pashut, to the point where he's just fulfilling what Hashem wants with a complete and full nullification without himself involved at all. Various levels to this. There's a sikha that Rebbe is mitzayin to over here in Chelek Yud Ches. I believe it's a sikha about the meraglim. They're very interesting how the Rebbe connects this. It is, you can have a mistaken understanding even. It's mashmir in the lashon of the sikha that it's a mistake in how you apply this yidiyah in Kabbalah Sale. So therefore, even a person that has the yidiyah of the Eibishter and he also has Kabbalah Sale still has to read Parshas Zachor, and there's still an Indian of erasing Amalek bedakas in his heart, because it could be that the level of Kabbalah Sale is not equivalent, or it's not exactly matching up. It's not that there's a mistake here in applying this idea in the level of Kabbalah Sale that he has. Okay, so this explains how it's possible to say that the schira of Amalek is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma, because besides the fact that it brings you literally to wipe out the descendants of Amalek, which is not applicable today, but there's the Amalek within the heart of the Yid, which is applicable to every single Yid, even though there is no miskavan limrid by kipshute by a Yid, but in the Aved of a Yid, having the proper level of Kabbalah Sel based on what you know, that's what we have to bavarim by erasing Amalek. So now the Rebbe will explain and answer why this is considered to be such a central mitzvah, and this is central to the entire Torah mitzvahs. So now with this we'll understand was Mochemes Amalek is vorgekommen baderech betzeschem in Mitzrayim far matan Torah. Why the story of Amalek when he comes to fight with Yidden, when does this happen? On the way when Yidden left Mitzrayim, right before matan Torah. V'balt as jede Sache is bashkacha pratis, since everything that happens is by divine providence, is move on as das gufa was Melchemes Amalek begashmis is given koydem Matan Torah. So from this, that the story of Amalek physically happens when? Before Matan Torah. So the reason is while Amalek beruchnis is menaged, it's because Amalek, spiritually, what he represents, he's in opposition, nit zulassen dem inyan v'chidush of Matan Torah. He doesn't want to allow the accomplishment and the novelty of Matan Torah brings into the world. So now, what is the accomplishment of Matan Torah? The oiftu for Matan Torah is, the accomplishment of Matan Torah is not just the fact that the Yidden have Torah or mitzvahs because the Ovis were Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula also. Rather, as Torah loy b'shamayim. The point is that we bring the Torah down here in this world. This is only the bleiben nor beruchnius. Torah should not just be a spiritual Torah, nor as muzarab kumol lamata. Torah descends here below, limud b'poyel u'mitzvahs maisi is dafke, to learn and to fulfill the mitzvah in action. V'adarabe, on the contrary, hamaise hu ha'ikir. The main thing is dafke in the action. Right? The Torah mitzvahs that the Ovis fulfilled was all, the main focus was all beruchnius. But over here, after Matan Torah, the main focus of Matan Torah is the fact that it comes down into action. But also, given the Tainas HaMalachim, this was the argument that the Malachim argued when they didn't want Torah should be given to the Yidden. Chamuda gnuza chulo. Torah is a precious hidden treasure of Hashem. So Tna Haitcha ala Shamayim. So Hashem's ray of godliness, which is in Torah, should be given where? It belongs in heavens, in a ruchnisdige world. V'balt as Torah is tachlis haruchnis va'ilui. Since Torah is the ultimate spiritual and highest expression of Hashem. Darf der Ort von Tna, where is Torah should be given and expressed, sie darf gegeben werden ala Shamayim. It should be given in heavens. Was is hecha afile von ruchnis shebaylam haza seichel adam, which is even higher than any ruchnis that we know here in this world. Intellect, human intellect is a ruchnisdige thing. It's not a gashmisdige tangible thing, but Torah belongs in heavens, which are beyond, completely beyond even any ruchnius intellect, human intellect that we know of in this world. That was the argument of the Malachim. Now, b'shas mizabim mevatel the minyan von Amalek. So when, on the way to Matan Torah, you get rid of Amalek. Now, what does Amalek represent? As von Moyach. Amalek did not want that your understanding should impact your behavior, the lower elements of the person. But you mevatel the Amalek. As von Moyach vet nimshach in maise b'poyel. That from what you understand in your mind, it should come down and affect you and impact you in your feelings and in your actions. Says da shleimus Hashem oich vavke. And then you have the completion of Hashem's name where the Yudke and the Vavke come together. Kemen danach mevatel zayin. So by this preparation that they got rid of Amalek, now you could also nullify Tainas HaMalachim, the argument of the Malachim of Tna Haitcha ala Shamayim, that Hashem's glory of the Torah should remain in heaven. Und es wird gegeben Torah dolamata. And after eradicating Amalek, then you can give the Torah here down below in this world. So therefore we see now that the inyan of Amalek is not just some side point of a story that happened, but Amalek was a fight against the whole entire inyan of Torah altogether, which is to unify, to bring together the Torah, the Elyon, down into this world in the Maise B'Poyel. So das ist mevayer goydele inyan von schiras Amalek. So this explains how great remembering Amalek is. Was is noch mehr negeya wie die andere zechiras kanal sif aleph, and therefore it's more important, more significant than the other of the 6 schiras. Weil zechiras Amalek is a hakdamu tnai zu klolus ha'inyan von the sinas ha'Torah, because remembering Amalek is an introduction and a condition to the entire concept of the Torah being given in this world. Noch eider a Yid nehmt Torah, even before a Yid could take the Torah and receive and take the Torah for himself, muss bei ihm sein bittel Amalek, was the lust nit, the amshacha von Meichen and Midas Amaisa. You first have to have that internal work in yourself to clear up the passageway from what's going on in your mind, from what you understand, that it shouldn't just remain something that you learn intellectually and cold, and you look at yourself and you say, I'm disconnected to what I learned, I could be myself. The first thing is a person has to put himself in the right mode to open up the connection of what he knows, that it should affect his heart. And now you're a keli to go and take and learn and receive and fulfill the Torah. Through fulfilling the mitzvah of remembering Amalek now in the time of Golus. So this nullifies, this eradicates the Amalek within the life of a Yid. we can hasten the coming as Mizal Kenen Mekayim Zayin Mitzvahs Mechias Amalek Pshutai, that we should have the ability to fulfill the mitzvah of erasing and eradicating Amalek physically, Ba'ilam Kulei Begashmis, in the entire world and even physically. As is Vetzayin, that Inyan von Mini Melech, that we will be Zeiche to appointing a king, which is Malka Mashiach, appointing Melech HaMashiach, was Vet Mevare Zayin, Ver is Amalek, and he will clarify to us who is Amalek. Und danach Yilchem Milchemes Hashem. He will fight the battles of Hashem, Kailul Milchamel Avaya B'Amalek, including this battle of fighting and eradicating Amalek. Milchemes Amalek v'Yenatzeach, and he will be victorious. Und danach V'Tebayin the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi, and then he will build the third Beis Hamikdash. May it be b'Meheira v'Yameinu Mamish, speedily in our days, literally.